Why is it a part of the curriculum? Well, in order for us to communicate with each other, it's very important that we have meaning, and we ask ourselves, well, what does that mean? That we have to sound out phonics? Does it look right? Do I see a chunk of words in there that I know in this big word? Does it sound right? Does it look right? Does it make sense? The teacher and the students will be asking those types of questions, where in the past, if you ask the student, well, does this make sense? I'm not sure. But we want a dialogue to take place with the student, in the minds of the student, and also with the teacher. The second one, so we just looked at the balanced literacy. Now let's look at the cognitive approach. Each student in the Faulkner Academy will spend at least 30 minutes or more each day learning how to think. This is unheard of in schools in Marion and around the area, because we think that thinking just comes naturally, that we don't have to work towards helping people to think, that it will come on its own. That's the assumption, but we know right away that that's not true. The students will learn and the teachers will learn that thinking is bridged into the content area. So not only will they learn how to think in reading, but they'll learn how to think in math and social studies and science. So all of the areas, thinking is built into the program. In 2003, I met a man in New York City, and his name was Jim Belanca, and I was there training teachers, and he had heard that I was doing a fantastic, he said, I hear you're doing a fantastic job in that classroom. I want to talk to you about something. And I thought, who is this man? I don't know anybody in this city. Well, I found out that he was the CEO of a major publishing company, and he had just sold his company to another company, except one component of his company he did not sell. And that was the work of Reuben Feuerstein. Reuben Feuerstein is a cognitive psychologist, and he, for teachers and also parents who know of Piaget, Feuerstein worked with Piaget. And he realized that there were different stages, Piaget realized that there were different stages of development for humans. But Feuerstein went a step further than Piaget. Piaget did not identify the cognitive functions that did not work in humans. He just identified the stages. Feuerstein went a step further. He said that there are functions when people don't learn, or when people have difficulty learning and processing information, there are undeveloped cognitive functions in the mind that is not working. So he has identified those cognitive functions. He also goes against the grain and becomes a little bit, I call a radical, but he's nearly 90 years old, he lives in Israel, and he says that IQs are not fixed, that IQs can be changed. But there's a stipulation. You have to identify the cognitive functions that are not working in the mind. So there are errors that we make, and I'll make it clear for you. I'm giving you the theoretical form now. But he said there are functions that don't work, but through identifying them, a mediation, that we can identify them and they can be corrected. So for instance, I'll give you a real clear example. When I was in school, I needed a car to drive to high school, and my father bought this old car from a guy, and it was a standard shift. And of course, I wanted to drive the car to the high school the next day, and Daddy, who was very impatient at times, well, come on out here, I'm going to show you how to drive. And he just said, well, put your foot on the clutch and do this and do this, and he just went all. By that time, I was just in a bundle of nerves. I just could not settle myself down to even think about driving that car to school the next day. And finally, because I didn't want to be disobedient, I said, disrespectful, I said, Daddy, you know what, I think I'm going to wait until Mama gets home and she'll help me drive. And so he said, are you sure? I said, yes. Well, my mother came home, and she became the mediator that Feuerstein talks about. She knew that I was impulsive, that I had impulsivity, which is a cognitive function. She knew I was ready to go, you know. But she said right away, I want you to stop, and I want you to think. And she said, the first step to driving this car is, and she put my hand on each part that she wanted me to do. She put her hand on it, on top of my hand, and she guided me. That was the mediation part, okay? She knew that I needed a system, which is a cognitive function. She knew I needed a system. She knew I needed to see, I'm kind of systematic. And some of your kids are systematic, and some of your kids are impulsive. They want to do it right away, and you have to say, stop and think. But because you have children and you know the behaviors of your children, you pretty much can identify the cognitive functions that are not working. Because you see your kids more times than the teacher sees them at different times, especially on weekends. So you have identified the functions that are working and those that are not working. When I say cognitive function, I'm talking about the thinking patterns of your child. Feuerstein says that IQs can be changed, that thinking can be changed if we understand the cognitive functions that are not working and those that are working in children, and we can correct those that are not working. But a teacher has to be trained to identify the functions that are working and those that are not working. Feuerstein is the only one, he went way beyond what Piaget said, because he's allowed us to identify and assess the potential of kids. And when I heard that, I got so excited. I thought, when Jim said, will you come and work for me? I said, oh, yes. He said, will you go to Israel? I said, yes, I'll go. He can change my thinking pattern. He can change who I am. I thought, wow, no one's ever told me this, and I've been teaching for 30-something years. I've been a reading specialist for 30-something years, and no one told me that my brain can be changed. I thought I was ignorant in so many things, and my mother just moved me to those states. She calmed me down. She calmed down my impulsivity. She gave me a system, because I didn't have a system of driving the car. I didn't have the verbal skills. I didn't have the vocabulary that I needed to help me. So when kids are sitting in the classroom and the teacher asks them a question, they just sit there. The teachers normally, and I've watched this being a principal, I've watched teachers say, well, that child is not doing well. Maybe I just need to send this child to special ed. Or you know what? This is a gifted child, because a gifted child can have undeveloped cognitive functions. This child is not getting it. You know, maybe something is wrong here. You know, we're readily able to diagnose and put labels on kids. But Feuerstein says there are no labels, because the brain can be changed, and we believe that there's untapped potential in every child, and we can move them beyond what we ever thought they could be moved through. Isn't that amazing? Can you believe I'm standing here telling you that your brain can be changed? And you're probably saying, but you know what? I really didn't get, when I was in school, I didn't get da-da-da. Well, you didn't get it because no one identified the undeveloped cognitive functions. No one ever identified the mental processes that was causing you not to get it, because it was totally unheard of that we could do this. Feuerstein says that mastery does not mean consciousness. I'm trying to get you to the point so you can see this man. He says mastery does not mean consciousness. I was in Dallas doing a presentation, and this girl raised her hand. She said, I was a valedictorian of my class. And she said, simple things I can't process. She said, my husband barely made it out of school, and sometimes he says to me, Jill, you just don't use your common sense. And she said, you know what, sometimes I try, but some things just don't make sense to me. And she said, I didn't realize that there were functions that weren't working that had not been mediated for me. And you're probably all sitting here saying, you know what, there's some things that I could have learned better, but no one ever identified the functions that weren't working, nor did they mediate. Now get back to the car story. When my mother finished the mediation, she calmed down my impulsivity. She gave me a system for driving the car, which my father didn't, because he suffered from impulsivity too. That means you got to do things. How many of you suffer from impulsivity? You quickly do things. Okay. How many of you need a system to follow? How many of you need verbal skills